we have what we call divisional disability representatives, or DDRs, and we are trained in medical leaves, in accommodations. We are given the authority to make the decisions in those areas and also to maintain everything confidential so then our supervisors are dealing with the medical things and getting them at a point of risk.
Don't conduct your analysis in isolation because data is so incredibly powerful.
Not defending just the tribe, but defending the organization.
Those creative people that you really want to keep empowered, keep excited, keep motivated, keep thinking.
A good experience pays dividends down the line.
Stereotypes tend to break down in proximity.
Welcome to We're Only Human, a podcast about human resources, business, technology, and the workplace. My name is Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad you're here. Hey everyone, it's Ben Eubanks, host of We're Only Human, and I'm really glad you're here with us today. Looking forward to a fun conversation with Jeff Palkowski. We're going to be talking about some of the things that he sees as a volunteer leader, some of the things he sees as an HR leader, and how those worlds combine. We're going to talk about some of the things that he thinks are challenges for all of us in the HR profession, and maybe even get some advice from him as well. So, Jeff, glad you're here. Welcome.
Hey, happy to be here. Looking forward to a great conversation.
I am thrilled for it. So I had the pleasure of actually meeting you in person a little while back and was pleased with that experience and was like, been looking for the chance to get you here to join me on the podcast. So I was glad you said yes. So before we get into some of the fun stuff today, would you take a minute and tell the audience more about who you are and what you do, please?
You bet. Ben, as he said, my name's Jeff Palkowski. I'm from Wisconsin. I'm an HR manager with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I've been in HR in the public sector for about 20 years. And as you mentioned, volunteer leaders is my passion as well. So in my spare time, I do volunteer with SHRM. I'm their incoming state director in 2025 for Wisconsin SHRM. I also serve as an ambassador for the SHRM Foundation. And just recently, actually a couple of weeks ago, I just joined the board of directors for Disrupt HR Madison. So I'm keeping myself busy here in Wisconsin.
What free time? That's what I want. I'm one of those people too, where you're like, oh yes, I just want to have one more place to plug in and one more place to get some, because it's fun. You're giving a lot, but you're also getting a lot of energy, a lot of great people you're meeting. So I get the appeal of leaning in on those things there. You mentioned that you've been in public sector HR for 20 years now. You also interact with people outside that bubble, right? When you're volunteer work, everything else.
Absolutely.
What do you think is most different or most unique about public sector HR versus private?
I have that conversation a lot because working in public sector and a lot of my colleagues don't look outside, and I have that advantage with SHRM and some other organizations that I can speak to others in the rest of the world. And I will say it's vastly different. I will say the one unique nature of public sector is, as you can imagine, it's part of government. So there's many levels of bureaucracy. I like to say things move at a glacial pace compared to the rest of the world. And probably the most important thing we have to keep in mind, particularly in my role where I am, everything we do is, again, we're part of the public. So everything we do is subject to open records. And when I talk to people in the private sector and tell them, oh, yes, I had to terminate someone a couple of weeks ago, and the termination letter that I signed was on the evening news. Fortunately, they redacted my name from it, but it just goes to show how everything we do is because we're part of the public has the right to know. So that's really the biggest difference, I think, between the public and private sector.
Okay. I'm imagining the bureaucracy. I'm imagining you have a big roll of red tape somewhere behind your desk and just ready to use that anytime you have to because it's part of the job. Okay. As you said a minute ago, one of the things that you do, you're volunteering in these different capacities, supporting and serving the HR community. You're hearing from a lot of people. It's like grassroots, boots on the ground kind of thing. So what do you think is one of the biggest problems you're hearing from all of our friends in the HR space today?
I think we could talk for hours and create a fairly long list of challenges we have. There's certainly many of them, but I would have to say the one that seems to be most recurring and one that I think I experience very regularly, and believe it or not, I know it's on many lists, but it's normally farther down the list, but I would see it as a higher priority, and it's really employee being and specifically mental health. Just seeing a lot of challenges from our individual employees. And I'll say a lot of this really started post-pandemic. And certainly with all of the challenges we had with kind of the world, shutting down and coming back, the workplace has obviously changed. People's lives changed. And I'm just seeing, I guess, a lot more individuals struggling with either balancing the new world that we're in now, balancing additional challenges outside of the workplace. And I have to say, just a number of employees, because one of the areas I deal with medical leaves, accommodations, and a lot of things, although the confidential things dealing with employee health, and just the volume of mental health disabilities that have occurred probably over the last, again, 2, 3, 4 years since the pandemic, it's just skyrocketed. And again, those are just the ones that have either been brought forward, been diagnosed, been brought to our attention. I just feel there's so many others that may be out there as well that have gone undiagnosed. And I see it impacts many other areas of the workplace. And SHRM has a big campaign, for example, about civility. That's something that we've noticed as well. Civility, just the ability for individuals to interact with each other, I just think has changed so much as we primarily work in a majority remote work environment. And I just think some of the interactions, the day-to-day interactions that go back 5 years ago were happening in an office, in a hallway, and now they're happening over Teams or Zoom. And it's just, I think it's just had an impact on so many individuals, even in ways that I don't even think we can measure. To me, that's the biggest challenge, the thing that, again, I deal with on a daily basis. And again, I think when you think of all of the other challenges as well, a lot of that can stem back to this issue as maybe a primary driver of them.
I want to follow up in 15 different directions now. Goodness.
Sure.
The first thing I think of is you mentioned the remote piece. I want to talk about that for just 1 second. So when you're together and I say something to you and you can see my body language, you can see my posture, like those things tell you if I'm serious or not, like how serious I am, or if I'm being playful, or if I'm like, hey, I'm telling you this, but I want you to push back because this is our chance to get to the right idea together, fight for something together. And you miss some of those cues when you're virtual, when you're digital, when you're remote. The other thing I think of, though, is there's a great story that I love to tell about Chris Hadfield. He's an astronaut, and he led the team that went to the space station for this long period of time. And they expect everybody in close quarters to always be bickering or some kind of fight to break out. It's just natural. Anyone out there that's got kids, what it's like getting in the car together and you're like, someone's going to get punched in the nose before we're all done with this. And so, not that I've had a challenge like that in the last 24 hours, but just saying.
No.
But they go through this whole tour of duty up there on space station. They come back and there were no real issues. Ground said there were no problems, there's no challenges. How'd you do that? He said, my rule before we left was every person on the team has to do one random act of kindness for someone else during the day. Unexpected. Today's Jeff's day to wash the dishes. You show up to wash the dishes and I've already done it. And like the little bits of grease in the gears just make us work together more seamlessly and smooth over some of the things. Like you may get annoyed at me, but you're like, yeah, but yesterday he took care of this thing for me. And so it just smooths that over. And when you're remote, you can't do that as easily as you can in person when you're finding some way to just step in and help somebody else out. Sorry, like a roundabout way of saying, I am totally on board with you there. And I think that just complicates things. Would you agree?
No, I agree 100%. And I guess the way I look at it, it almost seems like the interactions now in a remote environment are more transactional. It's like there's a beginning and an end. Whereas in an in-person environment, they were more spontaneous. You'd run into someone would walk by your office, and you had more of those opportunities to do what you had mentioned, those random acts of kindness. Hard to do it in a remote work environment. Again, sometimes I'll get a Teams chat, like this morning, someone said good morning and things like that, but it's just different. Whereas, and again, it's like I said, it's more transactional because sure, someone drops a chat, but then I may not see it till later this morning. By the time I respond back, it's afternoon. So it's just different from the in-person environment. And as you said, the nonverbal cues are missing, and it's just more of a challenge, I think, talking through the screen rather than talking face to a person.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the first thing you mentioned too, though. So you talked about mental health, well-being, like that's a big challenge. Everybody on the podcast here cannot see you, but I can see that you're wearing your summer school shirt. And one of the speakers we had this year was former EEOC Commissioner Keith Sonderling, who's talking about the data they have around the number of claims coming into the EEOC. And their number one answer, I'm sure you heard it like loud and clear, was around mental health, challenges around that, accommodations for that. And people saying, my employer's not willing to support me in this way. And so I feel like I've been discriminated against. And so that for me was very eye-opening because I expected other things to come out of that conversation. When he mentioned that, I was sat back in my chair and just thought for a moment, because you see little bits and pieces. You're like, okay, is this just a theme? Is it just people talking about on LinkedIn, or is it a real thing? And to hear that from him saying this is the number one and it's been spiking and going up, that was really telling to me that they're seeing that not just in Wisconsin, where you are, in Alabama, where I am, but nationally and probably globally as well. We're seeing this bigger push around that. People either becoming aware of the need for that, or asking for that, or pressing for that in a more open way than they would have in the past. It was like when my parents were in the workplace, it was, hey, bottle that up and get back to work. And now it's, listen, we know that eventually that's going to take a toll on you if it hasn't already. What are you going to do about it? And again, you said you're on the point of that as supporting medical leave, supporting those sorts of things. You see those things coming in. You can't talk about them, but you still see them coming in. And it makes you very aware of that in a way that most of us probably don't see it day to day.
And I'm obviously dealing with the human element, which is obviously, I will say, takes a toll on me as well, because obviously as you deal with all this, I'm human as well. So you take it personally, you certainly have empathy for them and you're trying to help them the best you can. So I'm dealing with the human side of it. But to your point, as it becomes a broader issue, certainly nationwide, probably globally, we haven't even realized what the true impact is then financially from loss of work time, loss of productivity, all these other things that are going to affect the bottom line as well. And maybe once that is realized in balance sheets, maybe organizations will take more interest and go, this is something we need to address. Maybe we need to direct more resources to because it's actually impacting our bottom line. And obviously they should be doing it for the right reason, I think, for the human element. But I think once you start introducing the financial aspect of it also, maybe it will rise in terms of something that needs to be addressed maybe sooner than later.
I want to ask you, based on your specific role, you talked about you help with these medical leaves, the accommodations. You're in the thick of that all the time. And a lot of the people listening here, either they're wearing many hats, and so they put that hat on for a little bit and then take it off. And you're wearing that probably most days or most weeks. So what advice would you give someone, or what's the biggest lesson you've learned maybe around helping support those types of transitions for your people out of and back into the workplace, or supporting them during those times? What sort of tips would you offer that you've learned from that experience that might be helpful for some of the others?
I think to steal a line from HR Summer School, one size fits one. So it's obviously everyone's an individual, and obviously it really depends on the situation. I can say the one thing that I spend a lot of my time, and you're right, that's the majority of my work, but I would say other than dealing with the actual employees, I spend a lot of time working with our supervisors because they're on the front lines. And I think the big part of it is they need to recognize things that may not be very apparent. I tell them things like, you need to notice when there's changes in your employees, just the change in behavior, change in performance. One of the first things we do, we want to make sure we provide the resources to those employees. If it's something outside of the workplace, which oftentimes it is, that we're getting them the resources to help, the assistance they need. I tell supervisors, an employee likely is not going to come up to you and say, I need family medical leave or I need an accommodation. Something's going to happen in the workplace. And you start having that conversation. And what we try to do is the reason I have my role, and this is something, I don't know if it's unique, but on our campus where I work, we have what we call divisional disability representatives, or DDRs. And we are trained in medical leaves, in accommodations. We are given the authority to make the decisions in those areas and also to maintain everything confidential. So then our supervisors are dealing with the medical things and getting them at a point of risk. So I deal with that for our entire division. We have 600 employees. So I'm working with a lot of supervisors and just reminding them that you have a lot of staff. You know them better than I do, but certainly you see something, say something, direct them to us, let them know. And then oftentimes they'll just reach out to me. We'll have a conversation. We'll find out there's been this long journey of, it could be mental health, it could be addiction, it could be so many different things. And the good news is then we're able to, again, hopefully get them the help or the resources they need. And then the only thing that we then share back with the supervisor is, oh, this person has an approved leave, or this person has an accommodation. We're not telling them what it's about or the factors or the diagnosis. But one thing our supervisors hopefully then notice is they have a more engaged, happier, productive employee because we've been able to address some of the issues that were impacting them. So I guess the biggest advice is just pay attention. I think, again, knowing individuals, and if you see changes, there's likely something going on. And that'd be advice I give to everybody, even to a friend. You notice a friend is different or something, have a conversation with them and find out how, because they may be struggling with something, and just sparking that conversation might be that first step in getting them on the right path. And I always look at the alternative, not having that conversation may have dire consequences that you may not even be aware of. And so I take that so seriously.
The thing I heard there was, you need to help your supervisors say, I'd rather you say something and it be nothing.
Yes.
And say nothing and it be something. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because like I said, if we have a conversation and we can just rule it out, that's great. But I will say majority of the times, probably 60, 70% of the time, when there's a referral to me, there's usually something going, and there's something that we'll be dealing with. And again, sooner than later is always the best as well. A lot of times these things come out when it's like, oh, we need to terminate so-and-so, or this person, we're going to fail them on their performance evaluation. By then, we're so far down, not to say we don't address the issue, but if we could have addressed it months earlier, we wouldn't be at that situation and dealing with that as well.
Yes. Okay. So there's one other stat I was going to throw out there. I'm a data nerd. So one of the stats I'll throw out there that you'll appreciate so much is when we actually survey the workforce about how they feel supported by their managers or not. One of the biggest triggers for whether someone says, yes, I feel supported, or no, I don't feel supported, is, does my manager understand me? And that goes beyond knowing someone's pay rate, knowing their job title. Every manager knows that about their people. do you know what makes them tick? If they show up and they are a little bit off, as you said, Jeff, can you tell that as a manager? Because if you can't, those are the things you have to know about someone if they're going to feel supported by you. So there's our public service announcement for the day. Make sure your managers know their people because it pays off long-term, supporting your people's mental health, supporting their performance, making them more engaged, all those things wrapped in there.
But Ben, then to tie it all back together as we're talking about remote work, now that becomes a greater challenge because we have supervisors that have never physically met their employees. They're working across the country. And you have that challenge of getting to know them remotely. And so it's even a bigger challenge than it was before when we were all working in the same building.
You know how you spell love, Time. So you want to know your people, you've got to spend time with them.
Absolutely.
There was one of my friends is a director of recruiting for a company. They have a couple dozen recruiters on staff. And back in 2021, when the recruiting world was like blowing up and you couldn't hire a recruiter for anything, competition was so fierce. They were getting people reaching out, trying to recruit their people away from them because they had a group of great recruiters. And so she said, for the next few months, I'm spending 3 days a week meeting with people, and that's all. The other 2 days, I'll get whatever I have to get done. But the 3 days a week, I'm meeting with these people one-on-one on regular meetings on this rolling basis. And they didn't lose a single one of their recruiters because she was in there with them and they're getting offers for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 more. And she, listen, if you take that, I'm not going to fault you. That's for you and your family. But you know that this is short term. And once things level out, they're going to lay all their recruiters off and we're not going to be doing that. So if you're willing to stick with us, we're going to stick by you. And they kept every one of their people because she put that time into them. And as you're saying, it's not easy to do that. It is really hard. I don't want to overlook the fact that these managers have a lot of things to do, but spending time with your people, getting to know them, understanding them, whether in person or virtual, spending time together. We're getting on a meeting and I don't have an agenda to cut through and tell me what you've done for me lately. It's, hey, Jeff, how's your family doing? What you did last weekend? What are you excited about? Is there something coming up that you just can't wait to tell me about? Because I'd love to hear about it. Just get to know somebody and know them deeper than whatever the agenda is for the next meeting, because that's going to allow you to connect more deeply. And that's the part you're missing, as you said, when you're virtual, you miss those in-person happenstance. Mm-hmm. You see someone walk by with a smile. Okay, well, something happened. What are you grinning about? And they're so excited to tell you their kid just won this competition over the weekend or something else that just means something for them to be able to share, and you give them a chance to do that.
Yeah, I would summarize it by, I think supervisors need to be intentional. And like you said, make the time, even if you don't have the time, because again, that amount of time that you invest, it's going to return itself in so many ways that once you know your employee, again, it's developing that relationship and you need to be intentional about it.
So I've got two other questions I want to ask you, on different topics entirely. So transitioning away for the audience's sake there. So when you mentioned earlier, you are the upcoming lead for Wisconsin SHRM, correct? That's
correct.
Up on the agenda. You are, again, speaking of being pumped up about something, you're grinning, you're revved up for this.
Can't wait.
It's exciting. It's terrifying. It's all those things.
Yeah, all the above.
And one of the volunteer leaders knows that. When you and the team are thinking about an event like Wisconsin SHRM, this big state conference, pulling together people from across the entire region to come together, I'm just curious, what do you want people to walk away from that experience thinking about, doing differently? How do you want them to feel? I just want to give the audience a little preview of someone who's doing this for an audience out there of HR leaders and let them hear it, because they go to the events and they see the agenda and they may hear the announcements and they just see the transactional part of it. They don't see all the behind the scenes, heart and soul that goes into creating something that's very intentional for people. So would you talk about that for a moment?
No, absolutely. And like any event, we want to create an experience for attendee, but for each individual, it's going to be a different experience. And I hate to go back, and maybe you'll give me royalties for this, but one size fits one again. So our last conference, we just wrapped it up a few weeks ago. We had just under 1,300 attendees. We're one of the largest conferences in the Midwest and even one of the largest HR conferences really nationally. And with that, you have 1,300 different people coming for different reasons. People at all levels of their career, all different industries, geographically, from all across the state, some coming from out of state. So it's how do we appeal to everyone? And you do the best you can. Obviously, you're not going to please everyone, but what we try to do is start with a robust program. And as you mentioned, first thing we want to look at is what are the biggest issues that we're looking at. We want to make sure we're addressing it. This year, big issue was AI. We want to definitely have some conversations about AI. We looked at who are some speakers that we could have to do that. We also try to bring some keynotes in that are going to be a big draw. This year, we had a couple of keynotes that I definitely wanted to point out. Number one is we brought in the SHRM CEO and President, Johnny C. Taylor Jr. He lit up the room. He talked about HR globally, and for most of our attendees, this is the first time hearing from them. And they heard a lot about basically the guy who's running SHRM and basically leading 300,000 plus members across the globe. And so they heard a lot of great things from him. We also heard from a speaker, I'm not sure if you've ever crossed paths with him. His name is David Horsiger. And he is all about trust. And basically anything you do in the workplace, and kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that it has to be based on trust. And we had a great conversation. He was our morning keynote. And we had some great conversations with him as well. So again, I think everyone takes something away differently from what they hear. You're hearing the same speakers, but everyone's taking away something different. So really, it's creating an environment where you have that experience, number one. Number two, I think probably the biggest takeaway that I like to see, and for me personally, it's one of my passions, it's really creating connection. Again, some individuals are attending a conference are fortunate to be coming with their coworkers. We have organizations that send teams to us. Great. We have people that are coming in by themselves. So again, imagine being one of 1,300 people and you're just there. And we try so hard to connect people, because I always say that if you attend any type of event, I don't care if I'm attending a small chapter event to attending the SHRM annual conference, I want to leave with more contacts and a larger network than I came in with. And not just about the numbers. It's really quality over quantity. But I just believe that as individuals, we can be so much more effective. And when we have a large network of people that we can rely on, as you mentioned, just the fact that people ask me, where'd you meet Ben Eubanks? I met him on a cruise ship of all places, in an HR conference cruise. You just never know where you're going to make connections, and we wouldn't be sitting here talking today had we not connected in some way. And I think about all of the different connections that I've made over time, and most of them have been at conferences. And some of them have become lifelong friendships. Some of them might be something where I run into an issue. We talked about a lot of the challenges, and I'm thinking in my head, who do I know that dealt with something like this? And then I'm just reaching out to them, somebody who might be across the state. Like you said, I'm in Wisconsin. I might be reaching out to a friend in Washington State and asking him questions about something I'm dealing with. And having that network allows me to do that. So when we put together a large event like that, we want people to create those connections. And that's a big part of it. So we try to encourage networking, try to encourage people connecting with each other. And again, in the most part, they're connecting with people within their own state. So geographically, it's doable. They can meet over coffee, lunch. Obviously, we talked about, connecting remotely, but I think that's one of the biggest things that we want to make sure that our attendees are walking away with. Certainly all of the programming and everything. Yeah, obviously that's important as well. But I just think things change and you'll hear different things from different places, but those connections are the lasting thing that I think can stay with a person as they leave our conference, hopefully with more support that they can reach out to.
Love that. I'm a big fan of showing up, really connecting into people. And listen, I'm as strange as it is, everybody hearing me here on the podcast, I am the shy one in a group. If there's a social thing and I don't know someone there, I just won't go. And so I've been at events where alongside George Rogers, who's my friend and coworker, and thank goodness George is there, because otherwise I wouldn't be there at all. And he'll go talk to anybody about anything. It'd be great. Start a conversation. Now I've got a group of friends. But until then, I'm just not going to open my mouth. It's a funny dynamic around here. Okay. I love that piece, really emphasizing the connections, the quality over the quantity. Don't show up saying, I'm going to get 50 names. Yeah. No, I want to walk out with 3 good people that I can call. When I meet Jeff and next time I got a question about a leave or disability or something like that, Jeff's my guy. I get to go ask him a question. If I need a question about recruiting, I'm going to go ask this person. Get a group of people around you that you can trust, as trusted advisors, if you will, that you just can ping things off of and have some experts in your life. That's always a good place to be. All right, the one last thing I wanted to ask you, you have this tagline on LinkedIn that made me smile so big when I saw it, Jeff. You said, an HR pro on a quest to prove that HR can be more than just a fire extinguisher. And I would love to hear, what do you mean by that? Because I've been talking about that topic a lot lately. And it's when I saw that, again, it just resonated with me so heavily.
I'll say that it came about maybe 3 years ago. It's just something that I thought of. And and part of it was interacting with all of the different HR folks that I do and hearing about their stories. And it really got me thinking that in my experience, there's too many HR pros that basically just sit. And again, this is going back to the in-office environment. Basically, they sit at their desk and hope that nobody comes to their door and their phone doesn't ring. And if that happens, they've had a good day. But when it does, it's okay. Now it's like the firefighter. It's okay, HR, what's your emergency? And then they're off to solve something. And I'm thinking, yes, we always do. put out fires. That's always a cliche that everyone uses. And so I started to think about it, and I actually did a blog post about being more than a fire extinguisher. And what I did to create the blog was I looked at a fire extinguisher and said, what can we actually learn from it? Because yeah, there's some element of this job where we are putting out fires, absolutely. But what can we learn from it? And what I did is I identified 5 characteristics of a fire extinguisher that I thought we could learn from. And if you think about your typical fire extinguisher in a business or an office, it's visible, it's accessible, it's reliable, it has a specific purpose, and it's rechargeable. And I thought about how can we apply that to an HR person? And so I wrote the blog. It actually was probably the most read blog that I've done. SHRM picked it up nationally, shared it as well. I actually had someone from India ask permission if they could translate it in their native language, and they translated it so I was blown away that it touched people. And I've had one of my friends from Michigan, Tina Marie Wohlfield, did a Disrupt HR speech, and she took elements of that and used it in hers. And then I actually did the same thing just 2 months ago. I did my first ever Disrupt HR speech. And again, as a fellow introvert, that was challenging for me to share everything in 5 minutes, but I did take this topic and talked about it. And what I meant by those issues is being visible, number one. I think every HR person needs to get up out of their chair, and if it's remotely, it's just making those connections. Because what I found is the more I've connected with employees and supervisors in my organization, I've developed trust, and I'll be the person they reach out to earlier. So then again, don't wait for the fire. I'm seeing a little smoke, I'm going to call Jeff. So being visible. And part of that's also being accessible. If someone wants to reach out to me, I'm responding to them as soon as I can. And I have a general rule that I've lived by for the last 20 years. If you reach out to me before noon, you're going to hear from me one way or another by the end of the day. And if you hear from me after noon, you're going to hear from me by noon the next day. And I've always lived by that rule. And even if it's not having the answer, at least knowing that, yes, I hear you, I'm going to get back to you. So being accessible is important. Being reliable, again, not just shooting from the hip, but it's like sometimes my answer is I need to check into that, and then giving them a reliable answer, because you give someone the wrong answer enough times, they're not going to come back to you. So that was something I learned from it. And then purposeful, knowing what my limitations are. An example I gave in my Disrupt HR was fire extinguishers are great on that small fire, but take it to a California wildfire, you're not going to do so much. You're out of your elements. And knowing when you need help, you need that employment attorney, you need that talent acquisition specialist, that benefits consultant, knowing to do that. And then finally, the last thing, it kind of ties in as we talked about well-being and mental health, it's being rechargeable, because in HR, we're dealing with all of these issues. And often we're the last one to realize that we may be suffering from some of the same things that we're addressing with our employees. So knowing when to recharge, when to take care of yourself. So with all those things together, I just feel that we can learn a lot from a fire extinguisher, but I think we can be so much more than that. And that's really the message that I've tried to share since writing that blog and now doing it as a Disrupt HR session. And I think it's become my tagline, because that's what I could continue preaching to the masses.
That's why it resonates so heavily with me, because we use that phrase all the time in HR. Hey, I'm putting out fires. And I have been guilty of wearing that like a badge of honor. Hey, look, and you're like, yeah, but if all you're doing is putting out fires, you'll never do anything else. Mm-hmm. We have to be more proactive. What is your fire prevention plan? Okay, that's a little more future oriented. It's more proactive than I'll just wait till something happens and react to it, because almost always reacting puts us in the wrong position. We react a different way than we would have if we had planned ahead, all the kind of negative parts that come out of that. So I love your approach there. I'm going to make sure you get that link. I found the blog post while you were sharing that. I found the blog post and your talk on Disrupt. So I'll get both of those links into the show notes. So if you want to hear more, you want to hear Jeff's 5-minute high energy talk on being more than a fire extinguisher, although that might have been 5 minutes there sharing that bit. You want to read the blog post as well, just because you want to see it or share it with someone else out there. Those will both be in the show notes of the episodes. You can check them out. Jeff, the time went fast. Man, this was so much fun. I appreciate your insight perspective on some of the things that you work on day to day, paid as a leader and unpaid as a volunteer. There's so many good things that you're doing out there, and I appreciate you for spending some of your valuable time with us.
I appreciate it. And again, I hopefully been able to spark some interest and convince some of the folks listening here that, just be more than a fire extinguisher. Like you said, I'd rather prevent fires and put out fires if I have the option.
Good stuff. To everybody else out there, hope you enjoyed today's episode. Got some good notes and ideas, both on, again, the leaves, accommodation, supporting your managers who are supporting your people, as well as some of the reasons you should be looking at events as a way to connect with others. Thank you so much for spending some time with us, and we'll catch you again next time on We Are Only Human.
Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm honored to have you as a listener. If you enjoyed this episode, please take 10 seconds to rate it at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, if you know a friend that could benefit from today's conversation, please pass it their way. After all, a rising tide lifts all ships. To see show notes, sponsor information, and our full show archives, visit onlyhumanshow.com.